still in Ward 1, and here we are in Strathcona at the intersection of Inchbury and Tecumseh on the edge of the Dundurn parklands here. And what we have behind me here is another beautiful black oak, another original black oak. You can see again the deep sinuses of the leaves. Again, it's a oak leaf with a pointed lobes and deep sinuses, as opposed to the white oak, which has rounded lobes, and as opposed to the red oak, which has pointed lobes but more shallow sinuses. They're not as pronounced. But this is a beautiful remnant again of the oak savannas and prairies that were in West Hamilton historically. These are the pre-settlement habitats that were here. Lady John Graves Simcoe, Elizabeth Simcoe, said of this area, she was here in the 1790s, and she said all the area around the Burlington Heights, the Dundurn grounds and all that was quite like a park with no underwood. So big open grown trees, and then all those same grasses I talked to when we were in Westdale there. You would have seen big blue stem, probably little blue stem as well, switchgrass, Indian grass, Canada wildfire, and then just dozens and dozens upon dozens of other perennial wildflowers would have been here as well. So just a stunning landscape that would have been here. And again, this is an original remnant of those landscapes, this big open grown black oak. And again, since the woodlands were open, they would have been all sort of open grown. So all spreading out with long boughs, long spreading boughs, as opposed to a forest grown tree, which grows, pretty much straight up, because it has to compete with all its neighbors here. And yeah, you can see the real chunky bark in the black oak. It almost gets kind of blocky with age. This was a black oak that was standing about 3, 4, 5 years ago still. And it was a beautiful black oak that was here. And what this was a perfect example of what are called black oak grubs. So this was a tree that had a black oak that had all kinds of scarring, bulbous scarring all around the main trunk. So you had a very large trunk coming out of this scarred, bulbous base. And again, the root system of this tree might have been decades, if not centuries older than the above ground portion that was visible even 5 years ago. But I guess it was getting rotten in the middle, and they took it down. But this was a similarly beautiful tree like this black oak here, and this gives a good idea of how spaced out they might have been historically. Perennial tall grasses and wildflowers all around, and oaks spread out so that you could easily walk through, just like Elizabeth Simcoe described, quite like a park with no underwood. So that means as well that there wasn't much of a shrub layer as well. There probably would have been shrubs like New Jersey tea and American hazel back then in these open oak woodlands or oak savannas or tall grass prairies, but they would have been mostly very open with no underwood, just quite like a park.
That's amazing.
Big spreading boughs and a beautiful array of grasses and wildflowers that would have been here in pre-settlement times. Just, really, even maybe 160, 70 years ago.
Wow.
Okay. So we're just on the edge of where we saw the black oak there. This is a restoration project waiting to happen if only the powers that be could, get it together. But there's all these remnant original red oaks and other oaks. There might be some black oak and white oak in here as well. Maybe some sugar maple, red maple, might even be a basswood in there too. But it's been filled in, and the whole understory's been filled in with weedy trees. And if we move back here, we can see some of these weedy trees, and some of them are just terrible invasive species that should never have been planted. This one, for instance, is sycamore maple, just a scourge. And yeah, a non-native maple that is quite aggressive, spits out lots of seed. It's a reliable seeder, and then they go everywhere. If we move this way, we'll see white mulberry here. And this is the same tree. You see those umbrella-shaped standards beside, front doors that people plant these weeping standards that are beside front doors, and they're filled with often filled with berries in the fall, and the birds feed on them, and then they poop the seeds out all over the place. And often they go to woodland edges and poop the seeds out. So that's why you have this white mulberry here, and there's a whole bunch of white mulberries growing here as well. And other trees that are problems here, there's lots of Norway maple here. There's lots of buckthorn as well. And you see there's virtually no understory. There's no ground layer, herbaceous layer growing here. And so what could be done? One of these original trees that are hidden in here, these large canopy trees. You can see a sugar maple back there, some red oaks and stuff. These trees cannot actually, they might produce seed, but their seed doesn't really have a chance to germinate with this heavy, invasive shrub layer and subcanopy that's really holding this whole forest hostage here until someone comes along and releases these trees by routing out all these invasive species and planting something native that could help restore this woodland here. So this would be something I hope the city could get on board with, actually restoring our woodlands going forward, because it's nice people they like their little local forests and parklands that are around, but what most people don't know is that most of the urban forests we have here are pretty low quality. There might be canopy trees there, but the shrub layers are shot. We don't have a lot of our native shrub layer species there, and because of deer grazing, because of invasive species like garlic mustard, and just all the foot traffic in these woodlands, you don't have much of a ground layer either. So you don't, if you walk along the Shadok Rail Trail, chances are you're not going to see trilliums. You're not going to see wild leek.
Right.
You're not going to see these species because they've just been routed out. Of course, some of them have been dug up and planted in backyards too, and and others are they just get trampled, either by foot traffic dogs, or they also get munched on by deer. Even wild turkeys, they're little vacuums of the forest floor as well. So yeah, we got our work cut out for us here in Hamilton, to restore these woodlands.
So first we'd have to identify the non-natives. We'd have to clear them out, and that would provide the room and the floor space and just the outreach space for the native trees to take over and succeed.
Yeah, native trees, native small trees, native shrubs, and then native herbaceous species as well. So a complete forest really should have like a super canopy, a canopy, a subcanopy, a shrub layer, and then a herbaceous layer as well, a ground layer as well. Most of our forests, they have, maybe a native canopy, some subcanopy species, and then the shrub layers and ground layers are just shot. Yeah, they're the first to go, the ground layers and the shrub layers, especially when you have really aggressive species like buckthorn and weedy honeysuckles, Tatarian honeysuckle, for example, elbowing out chokecherries and witch hazels that are native maple leaf viburnums and other, shrub layer species that should be there.
Yeah. So this begs the question, moving forward in our efforts to increase the canopy. It's obviously not enough to just increase the canopy. It's looking at places like this to, what is the canopy? What is a native canopy, the value of it? Where is it? What does it need to succeed? how do we create those conditions for not just increasing our tree canopy, but increasing our tree canopy in such a way where we're planting the right trees, I guess.
Yeah. I mean, we planted, so many Norway maples for so long. That's why the escarpment forest again along the Shedoak Rail Trail there is filled with Norway maples, because all the seeds are just, all the whirlybirds are coming right off the escarpment, right down in, mixing in with the sugar maple. So there's almost as many Norway maples as there are sugar maples there. So, this is a big job, doing this work. And what it also requires is a citizenry with the knowledge to be able to do that work, because, and to see its importance, because these non-native trees, a lot of our native insects just do not recognize them as food. So these are very unproductive forests for insects, and when they're unproductive for insects, they're unproductive for everything up the food chain. Okay, we're still in Strathcona, and we're on George Street, not far from Hess Village. And here we're featuring this beautiful black maple here. And black maple is a sort of funny species. Sugar maple is the common maple in our native forests around here, and is the stylized version again is on the Canadian flag, but this is black maple, very similar species, sometimes considered just a subspecies of sugar maple. But the leaves are, you see, it almost has like 3 main lobes to it. 1, 2, 3. The bottom 2 lobes, the 4th and 5th lobes, are pretty soft. They're not very pronounced. And if you picked up a leaf, Maureen, you'd see that it's fuzzy underneath. You can see the hairs there.
Oh, yeah.
See, it's very fuzzy, yeah.
Yeah, that's soft.
Yeah. So black maple is a common tree in southwestern Ontario. It hangs out in often in forested floodplains. It also seems to be associated a lot with escarpment habitats. So those talus slopes below the escarpment, those rocky slopes below the escarpment, black maple seems to be the most a very prominent maple. You'll find sugar maple there as well, but I think black maple, it kind of likes the limestone-derived soils. It's kind of like a calciphile, likes alkaline soils, and so that's why you'll see it in in forested floodplains where all those minerals leach down into the bottom, where they could take advantage of those, and then also in escarpment habitats where that rock is constantly leaching minerals that the black maple can take advantage of. And there's the Norway maples. You can always find Norway maple leaves in the city because Norway maples are everywhere. They're planted all over the place. So as opposed to the black maple, again, it's like a sugar maple.
Pretty? Not so pretty.
Yeah, right. Yeah,
Pretty?
I know.
Not so pretty.
Yeah, but just colors a beautiful yellow. A little different than sugar maple. It seems to be almost distinctly yellow in the fall, whereas sugar maples will go oranges, reds, yellows, sort of thing. And when you get an eye for it, you can actually kind of pick out black maples in the bark. It takes some years and practice there, but you can start to see black maples in the bark. It's a distinctly, seems to be a bit of a different bark. But say if you're in a floodplain along a creek and you see maples, you might see black maples there. And again, if you're walking along the escarpment, your chances are you'll see black maples there as well. The whole 403 hill, as you're going up the hill into Ancaster, the southern side there is this large forest on the escarpment there. It's primarily black maple, that forest through there. And that's even true for as you get over to, say, the Rock Chapel area as well. A lot of mostly black maple in that area, and it grows much like sugar maple does. It becomes a large forest tree and can grow, a couple hundred years old or more. But yeah, unusual to find it in the city. But I know of probably at least a couple dozen black maples in the city of Hamilton. And if you go down to Dundas, they're quite common in the neighborhood there. You'll see lots of Norway maples, but you'll see quite a few mature original black maples in the town of Dundas as well. So, well, again, this is an original tree. There would have been, this would have been a tree in a forest at one time. It might only be 80, 90 years old or 100 years old or something like that. But, I'd say it probably was not planted by man, but sometimes, though, farmers were paid, in the 1870s, 80s, 90s, and the late 19th century, they were paid a quarter to pluck trees out of their back 40 and plant them along roadsides. So those are original trees too. I consider them original trees because they're original genetic stock from our local woodlands here. But you might see, you're in a rural area and you see a whole line of sugar maples. So that was a farmer paid, was paid a quarter, maybe 125 years ago, to pluck some maples out of his back 40 and plant them along a roadway. And they were paid a quarter for each tree that survived, I think, 3 years. Oh, wow. Yeah, and so that's why you see rural roadsides lined with sugar maple. So this could have been a tree that was plucked from a back 40, but, I don't know, it might be, who knows? It could be just an original tree that was in a forest and, and just the last of, the forest species that were, say, in this area. But here we are in Hess Village. This is, there's a long human history in this area. So this could have been a tree in a hedgerow somewhere that was just left. And, and there's a few in this area, and you get into Durand and Kirkendall as well. There's just a handful of remnant black maples in that area. And again, Dundas has quite a few, but yeah, just very unusual to see a black maple, in the city core like this. Okay, we're still in Strathcona here, Ward 1, and we're on Margaret Street, and that's just a little street in between Main Street and King, and I live in the neighborhood, and I often use this as, many people in the neighborhood as a little go-between through here. And I probably drove down here a couple dozen times and never saw this tree. And that's kind of unusual for me. I'm always looking at trees. But it wasn't until I walked down the street, I think I was on my bike, and I biked down the street, and my jaw dropped, and I saw this beautiful bitternut hickory that's still here. I imagine when I first was just driving by it, I might have thought it was a red ash or something, because red ash can have a similar look in as far as how they color in the fall. They're a real yellow, and they have compound leaves as well. So that again, where they have, this is the whole leaf, have a central stalk and multiple leaflets, as opposed again to a simple leaf, like a basswood or an oak or a sugar maple leaf. And so, it's just a good lesson in seeing. When you're always in a car buzzing about, you don't see much, but when you get on a bicycle or just walk around, you see a lot more. And so this beautiful bitternut hickory is, again, an original tree and a remnant of, the probably woodlands that might have been here. Again, I think a lot of West Hamilton was sort of open oak woodlands, oak savanna and prairie, but there was also forest here and there, and this definitely was a forest tree. And by its size, it's got to be over 150 years old. And it's very unusual to see bitternut hickories in the city, original bitternut hickories. More often you see sugar maples, red oak, white oak, You'll see more shagbark hickories, original shagbark hickories in the city than you will bitternut hickories. Yeah, this is really a beauty. And probably only about a couple dozen bitternut hickories in the city, original bitternut hickories that I've seen. And as well, this is a tree that should be planted. All our native hickories should be planted, and primarily shagbark hickory or bitternut hickory. But no one really plants them. They are out in the nursery trade, but when people are thinking of planting trees, they often plant, say, something different. Hickories aren't often on people's minds, and they really should be. And part of the problem, I surmise, might be with, say, shagbark hickory. It's said to have, maybe a distinct taproot, and maybe if you're wanting to plant a large, bald and burlap tree or potted tree, they would have to cut off that taproot a bit to fit it into the pot or something. So maybe best to plant a small hickory and just be patient. It'll grow, and 10 years it'll probably be 15, 20 feet high. So yeah, just a matter of being patient. But again, this is probably planted by a squirrel. It is an original tree, and here it is stuck between the two busiest roads in the whole city, and it's amazing that it's still even here. And it colors this beautiful fall yellow. And yeah, just an amazing piece of Hamilton's history.